Welcome back to another episode of the Breakneck Podcast with Ian. And I'm Matt. We are entrepreneurs, people, but we're dealing with very fast-paced changes from all of the new AI technologies that are basically making a bunch of stuff we used to consider to be our jobs redundant. So, this is a 20 to 30-minute podcast about once a week. And we're really just trying to figure out how do you stay relevant. And today, kind of just go back to the heart of what traditional product was. Okay, let's build an app or an application, depending on whether it's on a phone or a computer, how many letters it gets. But that's basically the idea. Now we have this new concept of the agent as perhaps a new paradigm to replace the app or to replace the program. These packages that we put together. What's this thing that's all self-consistent? So, Ian, why don't you kind of just break down the problem as you conceived it over the weekend?
Yeah, this is sort of an observation that has crystallized over the last couple of weeks, which speaks to how quickly the stuff moves and how exciting it is. So we started the year collectively talking about agents being hot, and they do all this stuff, and it's fantastic. We're now heading into into the 8th month of the year, and I think we have a bit of a better understanding. Matt, you and I have firsthand experience of kind of building and deploying agents. And here's my observation, that agents are narrowly focused deliverers of outcomes. So you give them a task and they deliver on it. Business value is generally delivered through a sequence of tasks, right? Very few of us get to do one thing and it delivers money and we get rich. We have a series of tasks that create an outcome. And so the observation is this: in order to deliver business value, we need powerful platforms like Pact, for example, or we've seen big acquisitions like Cursor. So really we kind of went back to brass tacks.
Cursor has not been acquired. Windsurf was acquired, unacquired, and then finally, I think, stripped of its assets, and then the Rump acquired. But Cursor's still independent.
Yes, you are right. But here's another way of saying this. I think agents are tools, right? So if you go to a business and you say to them, hey, you're busy running your business, would you like this tool? They go, oh, that's awesome, it's cool. And you can give them a quick 5-minute demo, and that's fantastic. But they're not looking for tools. They're looking for a solution. So I think where we circle back to after 7 or 8 months of working with agents is a realization that the ultimate solutions, at least for right now, are going to be a combination of this cool new probabilistic tool, which is AI, plus a deterministic tool. It still needs to be productized in a way that a business can consume it and use it and deliver it.
Yeah,
so a very long-winded way of stating my case.
I read this weekend from Sam Altman, who says we're about to enter the fast fashion era of SaaS. And I think Sam Altman says a lot of stuff, but he's uniquely capable of making this determination for 2 reasons. One, he's the head of OpenAI, which is probably sees a tremendous amount of data on who's using what. And second, he used to be a prominent, if not the head person, it's always unclear exactly what his role was at different times, of Y Combinator, which probably during his tenure funded 1,000 SaaS companies. I don't know, many hundreds of SaaS companies. So in terms of, just how the market is being structured, which is really what we're talking about when we're talking about what is structure. What is, this application could do something, or maybe a different application. Why do we use Gmail for one thing and I have Calendar and Gmail are kind of bundled versus Slack doesn't have a calendar? Like, why is that? And I think there's these kind of natural tendencies for things and these historical reasons that they've traditionally been bundled together. And a person like Sam Altman has kind of seen huge numbers of examples of that. And he thinks it's going to be fast fashion. And I think that's kind of like the Shine or Temu. You buy something and then you throw it out a month later. And so the idea is that these SaaS applications, they'll pop up and then they'll disappear just as quickly. I tend to disagree with him, but I do take his opinion pretty seriously. And the reason is, I actually think that all of this is about coordination, because of course that's my hobby horse. And the structure of businesses and applications, why do several features all pop up at the same time when I open this application versus another one? are determined by how people coordinate and how they think and the kind of friction of coordinating and doing things with other people, and not necessarily because of the underlying technology. And I think to that extent, I agree with you, Ian, that you're still going to have applications, and it's not just going to be this free floating set of agents or a single chat window that you do everything in, because there's a lot of tools and data that you're going to want to have prompted, and it's very hard for a single window to bring up exactly what you want at all times. And it makes more sense for you to pre-think, I'm going to do design now, I'm going to open Figma. I'm going to be doing analytics now, I'm going to open my Excel file or an application that's focused on data, versus just like, I'm going to either, ask about Chinese history or, write a board deck. Is not the same application.
Yes, I agree with all of that. I think the other thing that's going to always point us in the direction of an application is we have this really cool technology, which is deterministic old school software. And it's worked for, I don't know how long software has been around. Is it 60, 70 years?
The deterministic software, I would say, like, the idea of a CPU with short-term memory that's exchanging back with the CPU running threads. I would call that normally the von Neumann architecture, which has been replaced by maybe or augmented by the GPU kind of non-deterministic inference style logic.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's been replaced. I think that the von Neumann architecture is very, very powerful. It has a fundamental requirement, though, which limits it, which is it requires some predetermined understanding of a logic or a rule. And we have absolutely maximized its use and abused it in certain situations, like used it where it shouldn't have been used. But it's still very powerful, right? And it's actually much more efficient than an inference type of approach to solving certain things. So the real solution going forward is a combination of both, right? Do we want AI to handle us logging in and passwords? Maybe not. Now, maybe that gets replaced, but simple example, right? So there's two reasons I think that we're still headed towards applications rather than agents. It's a combination of deterministic and probabilistic. And it's a combination of needing solutions, not tools. And AI as it stands today, and maybe at the back end, we'll talk about what's coming in AI possibly in the next week or so in terms of new models. But I think we're in a world where the current capabilities of AI are not sufficient to actually deliver a whole application or be a whole application.
Yeah, there's two things you said right there that I think are worth unpacking. One is the predetermined nature that is necessary to make a old school deterministic workflow or deterministic program, which is you need to know exactly what you're going to be doing in advance. And that's very limiting. And I've seen a lot of companies where everything's on fire and you come in, you're like, hey, we can help you automate this. And they say, well, as soon as we know what needs to happen, we'll get back to you and we'll automate it. And that's like, okay, that's a non-starter. And we've come in with AI and instead say, we see things are on fire. We're going to help reduce the chaos here. And so that you can start to think about what you want to make deterministic. And AI is incredible at that. You could take, just as an example, you might have a Slack thread that's been going on for 2 months about some terrible situation they need to solve. You can adjust all of that, organize it, and start coming up with here's the next 5 steps. That's not something that a deterministic program could do. Now, in contrast, you said something else, which is, for instance, security being one of those things that you don't want to be probabilistic, or 95% doesn't really get you very much at all. If 1 out of 20 attempts breaks your system, that's really, really bad. You need 1 out of a trillion, if you want to be secure, maybe higher. And for that, I think that actually looks at like as the overall system of programs and companies and again, the structure of how we coordinate with each other evolves. I think what's going to happen is you're going to have these bubbles of probabilistic type of, LLM driven, AI driven. Hey, this looks about right. We're going to kind of structure this. This suggestion helps you out. It helps you make progress, but you don't need to know in advance. And it's actually going to force us to be much more deterministic in ways that we aren't now. And a good example is login or security in general, which is if an AI agent can emulate a human, there's a bunch of stuff that we just basically say it would be really hard for a computer to do that. Therefore, we don't have a 256-bit encryption stage here that we have to prove that you have access. We'll just assume that you have access, right? Like, so for instance, looking at documents in a company. A lot of companies just have like 98% of their documents just floating around, and anybody in the company can go look them up. It's a very common thing, right? It's a lot of, but now that you have an agent, well, if one agent on one person's computer accesses and can emulate that user, and that's what a lot of people, like code use, your computer is going to go do access work for you. That just completely breaks the internal structure. And you need to move to something where every person has to request and gain access to every single document, maybe every single time, because it's just not stable to have something that can look through 10 million documents in an
I know
afternoon,
you're suggesting
having access to all of them.
that will drive more demand for deterministic software.
Yeah, and that's exactly. So cybersecurity companies right now,
Yeah.
I think, are having a really good time. My friends that have started cybersecurity companies are doing very, very well. My friends that have started finance companies and fintech companies are doing very, very well. Why? Because, well, as you have agents, this is general. I mean, agents is an extreme of like this much faster pace and this much more dynamic use of these systems. But as you have, let's say we go to the extreme where we have an agent that is going to operate my computer, have access to my credit card, have access to my login information. Well, now you need much more fine-grained control over who can access your social media, or who can access your email, or who can access files internally, who can access customer data or HIPAA. Like all of that just has to be extremely granularly resolved from a security standpoint. And second, we need the ability to make micropayments. We need to have much more dynamic and flexible payment structures that are also very, very secure with tremendous reporting. Because if I give an agent, and that's one of my standard, I think 20 episodes ago, like, what is the standard of if agents have succeeded? It's like, if I just give an agent $1,000 and say, go, that's the definition of agentic, is when we give agents control over resources. But both of those require just extraordinarily deterministic finance and security systems, or they don't make any sense.
Yeah.
Because you can't just let it just go run wild and spend 50 grand on your credit card by accident.
Marry that to a fast fashion world. And I assume by fast fashion, what you mean is you have an application that's great for 8 or 9 months, and then something comes along that's better. And you're like, oh, wow, yeah, let's use that. That totally makes sense. That thing that's coming along is
Sam Altman's phrase, not mine.
Yeah.
I tend to think it's like, no, like no one's going to adopt a whole new SaaS platform just for it to go at 8 or 9 months. What we'll have is data structures and overall kind of maybe more open standards. Like why there isn't an open standard for CRM still shocks me. It's such a simple application.
I don't know if I said 8 or 9 months. I don't think it'll happen that quickly because there is the kind of hysteresis, so to speak, of the friction of changing stuff out in a business. Because the bigger thing here for me is you and I, and probably many of our listeners are having this conversation together, and we're nerding out on the AI, and we're thinking about all this. We've got a bunch of other people, most people, who are busy running businesses, and they look at AI and they're like, this is one more thing I need to worry about. I'm busy running my business. What are you telling me, that I have to have an AI strategy? So I think that's relevant in two places. Agent versus application. They don't want to buy an agent. They want something that just works, right? It's Ian and Matt, it's your job to work out which bit's deterministic. And I don't even know what deterministic and probabilistic is. Please just work it out. I'm going to pay you for a piece of software that delivers me outcomes.
Okay. So I'm going to disagree with you for the sake of the podcast being good, which is let's create a differentiation here. You're saying that the application is going to be this bucket. You'll purchase the application, and then there'll be agents that are doing things within that application. My contention is that I believe instead of having like a SaaS application with agents running internally, which is certainly something like we have replaced so much code that we spent a long time writing, but more importantly, learning what needed to happen. And they say, we could just hand that to an LLM and it would do just as good of a job. And there's certain types of things internally where we could just get rid of a lot of complex algorithms and just say, just give to the AI and see what happens. And it's more than good enough. And you can get rid of a lot of code and just have a few prompts. So I can see that future of a lot of what exists in a software application just being agents kind of running internally, having their own little jobs. They spin up, they check some stuff, they do some changes, and they spin down. But I would also say that I think there's a much more likely future where we get open standards for things that used to be SaaS applications. So for example, we have, a system like Salesforce. I'll just use a CRM, which is like, again, it's such a simple application. It's just like, who are your who are your upcoming opportunities? What's the deal value? When are they going to close? And, when I think about Pact and like, thinking about future commitments and stuff like that, I'm like, Salesforce is just a bunch of commitments. It's a list of commitments that need to be updated. And there's some workflows around that. So I could easily imagine all of the cruft of Apex and all of these internal like scripting algorithms and systems inside. If you ever operated in Salesforce or built anything in Salesforce, it's just a mess. Why not just have the bare bones of an open standard for CRM that you can give access to an agent to change? And so I, as a company, I'm not going to have a fast fashion where I change out my CRM every 9 months. That's insane. What I have is a server which has an open CRM on it. And then there's an MCP application with a ton of security. Agents are only allowed to access certain information and do certain things. And then somebody says, I have the new sales BizOps agent that goes and accesses this open standard. So I keep my data maybe even locally on my own server. And these agents come and help me out with things and say, hey, we're going to help you build your quarterly revenue forecast. Okay, that's something, but right now that's all kind of within Salesforce. And my point is it could be blown up and you could have many different agents and then an open standard, again, which is very deterministic.
Yeah, I see. Yes, like those sort of CRUD applications. We've had this conversation. There's a bunch of big platforms like a Salesforce, and they should be quaking in their boots because they've got a bunch of customers' data. And the customer's like, I need to do things that are kind of cross-platform or cross-functional. I'm going to have my agents do all these things. And honestly, you're just a database now. So I do see those kind of CRUD applications really being pared down to that. But in describing it the way you described it, there is some other activity. You're trying to achieve some other outcome, which is most likely kind of cross-application, cross-department, cross-functional. And yeah, you're going to have an agent doing that, but I don't want to buy an agent to do that. That's another problem that I now have to understand that agent. What I want to buy is the solution that has the agents inside it that knows to go to the open CRM to do the thing that I care most about. So we'll put aside the fact that you and I both agree that businesses are going to get re-architected and refactored internally the way they run. Let's just keep it the way they are. If I'm in marketing and I am generating some 30-second video and I want to send it out to a bunch of different customers, and actually I'm generating 10 different videos, I need an agent to go and talk to CRM to get the different customers to understand their characteristics to work out which video to send. I don't want to care about that agent. I want the application that says, yeah, I'm going to build you 10 different videos. We're going to send them out. They're going to be 10 different videos based on 10 different cohorts. And there's 10 different cohorts because I already looked at your CRM and worked out the characterization of the customers, and I'm going to target them. So I want to buy an application that does that. Some of it will be deterministic. Some of it will be agent based. I don't want to have to work out how to log into my MCP server for the CRM to do all of this stuff. So again, I don't see a way where we want outcomes, and outcomes are delivered by deterministic and probabilistic software. Hence, application is the answer.
Yeah, I think you can look to, I think, the open web versus the closed web as a preview, because it's just accessing data, having permissions and stuff. And what emerged with the web is that you initially had the closed web. You had maybe like these Usenets, and then you had AOL. AOL was closed, and then you had Netscape. And Netscape created open web, right? It had so many advances that having an open access to many different websites was a hell of a lot better than having people go into AOL, create data in AOL servers that was just served out to everybody. And then you had the swing back with Facebook, where Facebook took a lot of what was part of the open web and again, close it off again. I mean, the web is very mature in that sense. You have Google basically owning all this incredibly invasive surveillance state that allows them to institute payments for advertisements. So they're watching basically every website you go to, and the advertisers can see that you went here and saw an ad and then you paid for it. And Google is the surveillance architecture. They have Chrome, and we talked about Ricky. Chrome's going to get broken out. But then within that, you have people like Amazon and Facebook who are very careful not to give Google certain things so they can maintain an advantage. Whereas I think if you look at SaaS, the SaaS ecosystem, because of the much slower pace of traditionally how quickly a SaaS application can grow and how companies procure, it's still very, I mean, it's all just walled gardens for the most part. You have Salesforce, you have these systems. And there was this kind of moment where we were going to have all these APIs. And I think that's what you got the explosion of SaaS. And that dream's dead. I don't think you're going to get this inner working network of applications that access each other. But agents present a very interesting alternative to that, which is if you do have these data sources, we're so far behind the state of the art in enterprise because of this, slow thing that it's like, do we really think that Salesforce is going to serve all of the needs with Agentforce and their access to no, probably not. It's way too fractured. What makes much more sense is that AI companies come in and they start accessing Salesforce here and there, whether by MCP or whether by just giving your computer the ability to log into Salesforce and update the notes based off of transcripts. And I think it's an extraordinarily unstable place, and I don't see the big companies responding nearly fast enough in terms of innovation. And I don't even know if it makes sense for Salesforce to own so much of the sales application space, given their performance over the last 20 years.
Well, I think the challenge is that owning all of the sales data in the sales realm is not enough, because really the promise of agents is this ability cross business to gather up interesting information across functions. And so this is this is a question I've had since our very first conversation late last year, which is you've got essentially these big CRUD applications that have a bunch of data, but straight away, once you realize what an agent can do, you're like, oh, give me a piece of this data and a piece of that data, and I want some from over there, and I want some from over there. So if you are a Salesforce, then you're like, well, I don't actually, yes, I do. Salesforce has more than sales data, but do they have 60% of a company's data? No, right? If you are an SAP, then I'm a little bit less concerned. It's interesting we don't talk about those guys as much, right? If you're an ERP system, old school, you probably have maybe 80% of the data of the business. And so you can start.
I mean, if you're an old school ERP and you're entering like, bombs for chemical production, it's like that changes every 20 years. Of course, it's like a very old technology and it doesn't have very much sophistication or competition. I mean, it's great business to be in 25 years ago.
Yeah, but you have all the data is the thing. Like if Apple, for example, I don't know what their state anymore.
But in terms of like how a factory runs on SAP, yeah, they have a lot of data, but there's very few decisions that are predicated off of data in real time versus sales could be extremely robust in terms of how it uses data to very quickly change. I mean, there's so much that can be done interacting with the customer now that I don't see done. I think there's a lot of really shitty outbound sales development.
I hear
emails.
You. My point about SAP was that nowadays they will have a bunch of, like Apple runs a bunch of its sales stuff through SAP, right? So I'm taking SAP as an example, having kind of cross-functional data in there. And so if you're like, it's hard to get at, and SAP is a pain in the ass to deal with. So agents, I think, would work fantastically well. So if SAP were to say, hey, we're rolling out agents, I'd listen to them a lot more than I listen to Salesforce, because you're like, yeah, that's great. But Salesforce, you've got a small slice of data. I want to introduce another alternative in here, which is some sort of orchestration versus an application orchestration. You have a shitload of agents running around your business doing stuff. Maybe there's just an sort of infrastructure like orchestration layer, which solves the problem that I've identified, which is, hey, I'm a business. I love this idea of agents, but they're a tool. I don't have to manage them or organize them or do anything with them. So maybe I'm kind of rebuilding it back up into an application, but maybe it's not an application, right? Maybe it's orchestration is a sort of an infrastructure type product that
this is my whole view on the thing. Is everyone considers there to be like, oh, there's this ground truth work, and we talk about knowledge work. Oh, there's some tasks that I'm going to do. No, there's just kind of these consistencies, and we say, oh, that's kind of like marketing, and that's mostly design. But everybody, to be a knowledge worker, has to send emails, and they have to communicate, and they have to make presentations, and so it's this mishmash, and it's never, this person does, just this, and this other person does just this. And so we say, well, what's the ground? What is like the real ground of what are these different tasks that people are doing? And it's just this hybrid of making sure that the whole company stays coordinated. And, so much of the US economy has moved to services. Like we don't even realize that, like, no, it's just a group of people coordinating with each other constantly on top of these highly productive machines that produce our cars and food and things like that. 50% of people in 1900 in the United States were farmers, and now it's like 2.5%, right? Like we have all of these very effective base inputs, but then what we call knowledge work is primarily always coordination. If you're a designer, you're mostly coordinating. You're an engineer, you're not mostly writing code, you're mostly coordinating with other people. If you're a salesperson, you're mostly coordinating with other people. You're not selling more than about 1% of the time where you say like, hey, can you buy this? And mostly it's like making sure people have access to information, maybe sure the sales engineer gets in a person with this one or scheduling a meeting or so. Just people coordinating over and over and over again. And what's going to happen is now that we're going to have this sea change in the different functions and different software we're going to use, it will seem like, wow, coordination is really becoming like this big problem. But it's like, no, it's always been coordination. A CRM is not a tool to do work in. It is a coordination system. There is no work. Like sales is not work. It's coordination. It's just, it's just like
it's a system of record, right? That's a term that we've
systems
been
of
using for
record
a
are
long time.
tools that we use to make sure that we're all doing the same thing at the same time. And I think, I mean, my whole thesis with Pact is that this flexibility and this speed is going to allow a new baseline for coordination to happen, which is not work, but in fact, what outcomes you want, which I think is my big thing is that because what we consider work to be done is now can be done by AI. All of the effort, or the next 10 years is going to be so much people's work. It's just going to be making sure that AI keeps doing stuff in the right direction toward achieving these outcomes. And so people will experience their work more and more simply as full-time coordination, fighting fires, updating people, all that stuff. And
So are you saying, let's talk about that last statement, people will experience their jobs more and more about coordination, but it really is all about coordination today, with the exception perhaps of sitting in Salesforce and having to enter stuff and move stuff and do,
well, that's the
manipulate
point
it.
is it feels like work because you're one level abstracted and alienated from what it is you're really doing, which is just making sure that everyone knows the status of that deal, right? And it's alienating and it feels bad because you're like, why am I putting all this effort into Salesforce? And I've heard people, ostensibly salespeople, say stuff like, well, why do I have to mark a deal as closed loss? We don't care about that deal anymore. I'm like, no, you have to coordinate the rest of the sales team in order to forecast your number. It's going to impact capital usage across the whole company. If you're going to have up 10% quarter, it's going to be very different hiring plan than if you're a down 5% quarter, right? Like,
Yeah.
and so what happened is Salesforce alienated the salesperson from what their real job was, is to make sure the company is ready to handle those sales. And they just saw it as a bunch of tasks. They say, I got to work. No, your real job. And I think the same thing with software engineers. They say, oh, I got to write some software. No, you got to make sure the client is using the software to obtain value. If you're doing that, that's mostly coordination. But GitHub and all of these SaaS tools alienate you. And they say, no, your job is to make a code, like push some code to production or push some code to this GitHub or do a commit. And then it's somebody else's job to make sure it gets used. Well, then there's 2 extra layers of managers. And that's what we see is you get this SaaS software, people then do repeatable work. But really, it's not that it was ever repeatable work. It's that they were alienated and kind of like turned into automatons on top of this data layer. And then there was this whole other layer, which everyone got mad about. Like, why are there so many project managers? Why are so many people who just sit around and do email jobs all day? It was because we had all of these systems that alienated people from their real work of who they were actually delivering value for. They split you from it, and then they made it just somebody else's job to coordinate. But it's always been there.
So it
That's
gets you
always been the
closer to the
job.
customer then, I think is
Yeah,
what you're saying.
that's what AI is going to do.
Powerful.
Smaller, leaner teams. You're just working on exactly what you're working on. And I don't see these SaaS tools. They just got very, very clunky. They started from a point where workers have always been alienated from capital. I'm on my Marxist tip right now. It's like, it kind of feels like a Marxist. And then I just went full Marxist. Once I said the word alienate, I couldn't help myself. Yeah, I think people, there's the boss who decided what to do, and then I do it. And with AI, you have so much more capability to move quickly that businesses will be much better by having people actually accountable for the real valuable outcome of their work, which means, I'm delivering for a customer. I am making sure the customer implements my product instead of just buying it. Subsuming all these different roles into one person makes it so that that coordination can be much more natural and people can actually see what they're doing versus I updated Salesforce, I did my job, close their laptop, whether or not it's actually successful.
Yeah. Echoes of the conversation last week with Michael Core on the hardware side of things, right? Garbage in, garbage out. All this data needed to get somewhere for somebody to do the design and streamlining that.
So I think the conclusion of this episode is that who knows? I don't think we've reached a very strong.
Is who knows a conclusion? I'm not sure.
It's certainly not a conclusion. But no, it's going to be very interesting to see how I think that this is Sam Altman point, whether it's fast fashion or whether it's open system. I don't think Sam Altman's the kind of person who really wants to advertise the fact that there should be open security standards, open financial standards, like the stable coins just passed a lot of law. And I think stable coins are mostly scammy, but I also believe that about the normal financial system. So we'll see which kind of scammy system wins. Open standards for coordinating internally. I think all of this stuff is a possibility now. And someone like Sam Altman wants you to believe that it's all going to just be in OpenAI and they're going to control everything and it's all going to be in their system rather than, hey, LLMs seem like a commodity. Seems like there's 15 different competing open standards for LLMs that all have a equivalent performance depending on how many servers you buy. He wants you to believe that it's all going to just be this brain. And he might be right. I mean, he's a very successful person. But I think much more likely, and to your point, is that there's going to be these resilient, determinate data standards, these definite ways of interaction. And because of that, there'll also be companies and applications which surround those things that'll still look exactly like what we have today, but it's not going to be the same companies and it's not going to be the same interaction modes and it won't be the same job functions when we emerge from this. I think that's a conclusion.
I'm with you. Okay. Well, let's shift to our usual, what have you seen this week or what's on your mind?
The one thing that struck me over the weekend, and this has been building up for the past couple months, is how much CapEx is going into data center productions. And the graph I saw is that 4 or 5 years ago, the amount of money spent on building new offices was 7 times higher than the amount of money built on data centers. And over the past 4 or 5 years, especially since COVID, obviously less money is going into building offices and way more money is going to data center, to the point now where we're putting more money into building data centers in the United States than building office buildings. And if you look at the trend line and you look at the projections of how much people are going to put in, so I think we're definitely crossing a threshold there. And either that means that really AI is going to do most of the work. If you kind of think about what that means, like there's not going to be buildings with people and there are going to be buildings with machines in them doing the work. It's a very interesting point in history. And then the second thing is, man, that's a lot of people building very competitive services that are very capital intensive, and they won't know if the demand is going to hold up until well after they've already spent the money. And that's, you look at the huge bubble around data transmission infrastructure, like fiber optics around 2000. That was one of the worst parts of the bubble, is that people owned dark fiber for 10 years after that just never caught up. And I am pretty worried that we're going to enter the AI winter, and it won't be because the AI isn't good. It'll be because we have way, way, way more capacity than the models really economically can make up for.
Yeah, it's so the thing that has been top of mind for me this week is that rumor about ChatGPT 5 and Anthropic's new one. I think it's a 4.5 Opus or something. I've forgotten what it's called, but it's also interesting to me that both of the companies locked in funding in the last couple of weeks, because when you say AI winter, a couple of things could happen here over that. I'm just thinking short term. I'm thinking the next 6 months to 9 months. But as these new models come out, there's loads of positive and upbeat and downbeat rumors about ChatGPT 5, but it's entirely possible it comes out and it's not very good, or it's not a lot better than what is there.
Well, it doesn't have to just be good. It has to be like transformational. I think there's still a huge amount of work they can do just to integrate the existing functionality. And we saw like the great advance of 4.0 having image generation, where they went from separate image generation into a kind of combined experience. It was such a huge advance. And so you can imagine, you look at the agent stuff, they've combined a lot. So I think there's a long time that OpenAI is going to continue to produce pretty fundamentally better
Well, I think it
product
needs
by
to, right?
integrating.
If they come out and it's widely panned, and that, look, we'll look at this and it'll be dots on a chart. So I'm not too concerned if it's, if it's down a little bit. But I have to imagine if let's say we're somewhat skilled in the art of fundraising narratives, Matt. And so timing is important in terms of fundraising and what's happening externally. So it's just interesting to me now, but I'm sort of super excited to see the models, and at the same time, I'm trying to understand what it means more broadly.
Yeah, I think 4.5 was clearly like a better model in certain ways, but I haven't found myself using the bigger models. It's been the reasoning models. I use O3 a huge amount. That's my go-to for anything complicated. It's so good. I use it over Google now for a lot of questions. If it's at all complex, I know Google's not going to return the right result probably. I go to O3.
Yeah, agreed. All right, Matt. Well, we will. I guess we'll leave it there. We should revisit this topic in a month's time when the new models are out.
Well, yeah,
presumably.
that will be much easier episode in terms of coming up. Like, obviously, we're going to talk about that when they come out.
There you go. There you go.
See you, Ian.
All right. See ya. Bye bye.